1,000 times on your way to Stanford Shopping Center, perhaps. But we've been here since 1971. We are your place to see and make art, to activate your creativity and expand your community. And this building, fun fact, used to be the City Hall back in the 50s. I just wanted to give a quick welcome. Housekeeping, bathrooms are through those double doors. There are singles. For those of you who can stay after the luncheon, I would be more than happy to share our new exhibition, Grow, with all of you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Ryan.
All right. Thanks, Karen. Welcome, and thank you all for coming to the 2024 IDEA Luncheon. I'm Ryan Magcuyao, the Development Director of Acknowledge Alliance and the 2024 VP of the IDEA program. I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land of Palo Alto, the Tamian Nation, Ramaytush Ohlone people, and the Muwekma Ohlone tribe. They have lived here for thousands of years, holding an interdependence and being role models in stewardship of the land. As uninvited guests, we pay our respects and affirm their community. The IDEA Fellowship was established to address the challenges of fundraising professionals from historically underrepresented groups. This year-long program provides leadership training and opportunities, with this luncheon being one of the program goals. So thank you all for attending. This is not just a check mark, but a culmination of the program. I would like to ask this year's fellows to stand up and thank them for all they've done for this work. Elizabeth, Christine, Andrea, Charlie, we'll have Jeremiah, Carlos, and Elaine, who are not here, but they should be arriving shortly. But thank you all for your participation in this program this year. And thank you to the AFP board members who are here, and thank you for the support, especially from Ashley and Dawn, and as well as our IDEA VP-elect of 2025 VP, Kat Wong. Thank you all. And we're here to continue the conversation of inclusion, diversity, equity, access, and justice. Our speakers, individually and through their agencies, have implemented and promoted IDEA principles. And we hope this conversation will help you all continue to look beyond introducing IDEA into your organization's culture, but to expand and defend it, especially as we have seen the word vilified in the news. I'll turn it over to one of our fellows, Elizabeth Wells, Director of Foundation for College Education, to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Ryan. Good afternoon, everyone. As Ryan noted, I am Elizabeth Wells, and I am a proud member of the 2024 cohort of the IDEA Fellowship Program, so thank you, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our three guest speakers. I'll start with Mr. Lavere Foster. He is the Associate Director of the African American Community Services Agency based in San Jose. Lavere Foster holds a master's degree in higher education and student affairs administration from Buffalo State University. As Associate Director of the AACSA in San Jose, he leads the expansion of programs that support the African American community, including STEAM education, leadership academies, and cultural festivals. Mr. Foster previously served as the AACSA's policy and advocacy coordinator and gained valuable experience as a legislative aide in Miami, working with Mayor Oliver Gilbert III and the Miami-Dade County Board of Commissioners. So welcome, Lavere Foster. And next I'd like to present Maria Garcia, Director of Grant Making for the Health Trust. Maria Garcia manages the grant-making department at the Health Trust, overseeing strategic planning and community engagement. Since joining in 2010, she has helped guide grantees in meeting their goals. With over 20 years of nonprofit experience, Maria has expertise in direct services, board relations, and fundraising. She holds a BA in communications from Santa Clara University and a master's in speech communication from San Jose State University. So welcome, Maria. Dapelo-Garcia. She is the Senior Manager of Diversity and Inclusion at Stanford Healthcare. So Anna earned a Master's of Public Administration from the University of San Francisco and a Bachelor's from St. Mary's College. She is recognized by the Silicon Valley Business Journal and the New York Times. She founded Lean In Latinas and has held multiple leadership positions, including Vice Chair of the Hispanic Foundation of Silicon Valley. In 2021, Anna was appointed to the Santa Clara County Hate Crimes Task Force. She has been featured in Forbes, NPR, and the Wall Street Journal. So welcome, Anna. And at this time, I'll turn the mic over to Ryan to begin our panel discussion.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. This is a very important discussion, I think, especially as we're in election year. I don't think this conversation, this topic is ever, not in contention. So I want to ask, starting off, how have you seen DEI efforts change in the last year? And whoever wants to start.
I'll go ahead and start. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here and to be among these amazing colleagues. Again, my name is Ana Dapelo-Garcia. I am a Senior Manager of DEI at Stanford Healthcare, as well as the founder and president of Lean In Latinas. Well, yes, so when I actually started with the DEI department, first of all, I'll share that in November, I'll be a 35-year employee at Stanford Healthcare. So that number scares me a little bit. I think, what happened with all those years? So I was actually the second person to the DEI department, which is going to be about 5 years old. So it's rather young on the hospital side for the adults. And when I started, I think most people said, oh, this is great. What is this going to do for our workforce? And it was a little quiet. The phone wasn't ringing a whole lot, but it was the unfortunate murder of George Floyd that really reverberated across the globe, basically. And have some thoughts around now people paying attention, but the good thing is people were paying attention. And we now know with sort of the SCOTUS decision, there are companies, and we're actually getting people who are applying for jobs of DEI. The good news is where I work, we're still committed to it. We're actually growing our department as opposed to other organizations, thank you, as opposed to other organizations that are downsizing. So I have a few views on this. Yes, you read out in the headlines, DEI is under attack, DEI is under attack. There are companies that are no longer committing. But for me, somebody who identifies as a Latina, somebody who is still considered underrepresented, who is still considered marginalized, the very fact that we're even talking about DEI is progress in my view. And so even if we're talking about it being under attack, we're talking about it. This is not something that we talked about in the workplace 25 years ago. Imagine 30 years ago when I first started, what the rooms looked like. We didn't talk about DEI. So, I think it's really who you're talking to and where in the country. But I'm happy to share that our organization is still very committed to it.
That's wonderful.
Happy to chime in there. I can talk a little bit about from the philanthropic standpoint, and I think collectively, I think we were all kind of holding our breath to see what the ripple effects would be from the SCOTUS decision across a number of sectors, including philanthropy. So I think it's really around getting educated. What does that law mean, and how does it impact? We've heard also there's been some recent settlement from Freedom Fund, who settled a case. They had a fund that was supporting Black women who were small business owners, and they had to settle the case. And so actually today, Chronicle of Philanthropy is hosting, a webinar to kind of dig deeper in terms of what that looks like and kind of study it a little bit more. And while it feels like we are taking one step forward and 2 steps back, what I'm hearing also from our local foundation peers is this is not the time to buckle down. This is the time to continue to remain committed to this work and to this cause. And I will say that the way that we can kind of continue to keep the foot on the gas is by ensuring that we also invite other lenses as we're strategizing. So we can include race, but we also include socioeconomic status, we can include gender, we can include zip code. The data reminds us of where the disparities lie and who is impacted the most. So that's where I would encourage us to continue to keep sight on that. There are a number of other lenses that we use to really continue to push the work forward.
And I can add to that as from the nonprofit side, as I'm here representing the African American Community Service Agency. And a lot of the work that we do is serving underserved communities and putting them in positions to really succeed. And as what was mentioned earlier regarding what happened with George Floyd, we saw like a huge uptick in organizations and individuals caring about like the underserved communities by providing like funding that can help propel our organization. But as we talk about what's happened in the last year, from our organization's perspective, as we're fundraising and thinking, okay, well, those same people, those same organizations cared back then, do they still care now? We're kind of really seeing that shift where maybe funding is shifted to maybe more other things. And then as an organization now, we're really starting to have to think, oh, well, how do we pivot without really losing what our values are and our commitment to DEI efforts and really trying to, uphold like our community. One of the things we really try to make sure is really starting to, or continue to hold on to those strong relationships, because we know the people and organizations within this work that really hold on to those values and not losing that sight, like while we're right now trying to figure out where things are going. So when, maybe as our landscape continues to pivot or shifts, we know who we can continue to rely on and how we can continue to serve the community together.
Thank you. So I hear a lot of, continuing the conversation, expanding the labels of disparity, and working with partners. So I think that's a great transition to how do you continue to promote DEI efforts within your organization and what you're doing. I think internally there's a lot of questions on why these practices are being held and how it's affecting your culture. So if you can talk a little bit about that. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to interrupt and ask a question. We want to make this a fluid conversation. But, yeah, if anyone wants to take that question.
Yeah, and I would say it's really through really knowing what our mission, our vision, and our values are. Just because regardless of what staff we bring into our organization, what programs we bring into our organization, what trainings we have, we kind of still hold on to what the nucleus of what our organization is and what our values are. Because regardless of who's in the room with us or who comes into our space, if we hold on to that, then we will actually know, okay, here's how we can continue to implement different programs and still show those initiatives through the programs that we're offering. So even as we're seeing a lull, with kind of what is being put out there regarding funding and initiatives and whatnot, we still hold on to our true values and show how that impacts our community. When it's time to actually go out and get more funding, we're showing how that impact is affecting our community. We're showing how through storytelling, how people are continuing to be impacted by it. Then also through data as well, how many people still need services and how many people can really benefit through what we're doing within our organization.
Yeah, well, I really love that you mentioned data because that's really has been sort of the catalyst in the work that I do. So I wear two hats. So during the day, I'm the Stanford healthcare person. And then by night and weekend, I am the Lean In Latinas person. So I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Lean In. It's really the book by Sheryl Sandberg about 10 years ago. And then about 7 years ago, I created Lean In Latinas with 3 people in my backyard, not really appreciating what was going to soon happen after that. We're now thousands of members across the globe, so it's just taken, it has life of its own. I don't even question it anymore. But what I've come to appreciate is that without the data, it's really hard to get people to pay attention. And so lean in, and I was part of the Brain Trust, one of the contributors to the just published State of Latinas in Corporate America report. So it's out there, it's available. And given that I can say, and I don't know how many of you even know this in the room, that for corporate C-suite positions across the United States, across America, Latinas only hold 1% of those roles, which is a very hard thing for me to swallow, to be quite honest with you, because, you know, when I got into the workplace 40 years ago, I looked for women who looked like me, who had my lived experience, and I didn't see anybody. And now, fast forward almost 40 years, and I'm talking about 1%. And so, you know, I think it's harder now, I think, to get people to pay attention, but the data really is what we're focused on, to tell the story, and I think the stories are good. But I've come to appreciate that without the data, it's really hard to get people to support you.
Yeah, I see that equity is really foundational to who we are at the core of the Health Trust. I mean, our mission is to build health equity in Silicon Valley. And unpacking that a little bit, what that means is that for us, we believe that every resident in Silicon Valley should have a fair opportunity to lead healthy lives, right? So we look at where zip code, immigration status, race, income, none of those should be barriers to health. And our staff and board are made up of a diverse mix of individuals, but all with that deep commitment to keep on pushing our mission forward. And our approach really is we understand and we prioritize different experiences and a diverse, you know, all of us bringing in our diversity to really bring in these solutions. So we really lean, when we're investing in organizations, we ask the question, how are you bringing in community residents to help co-design solutions? And that is an approach that's really important to us. So we believe bringing in community residents, nonprofits, the public and private sector, all of that is critical. And piggyback on the data piece, I think we've mentioned it in the last question, how important that is. And then one thing that we've also felt that is critical is being proximate to communities. So sometimes there is a data lag. So continuing to keep a pulse on the real-time needs complements the data, but you're also hearing in real time what those barriers are, and again, helping co-design in real time to address those disparities.
Just one more thing that I'll add. Sometimes it doesn't even take the data. Sometimes you can look at who's leading companies. Do we see diversity? And diversity is not, as we know, just about race and ethnicity. It's about gender, it's about sexual orientation, it's about disability. It's really, you know, sometimes we don't need the data. And so, but it is important, especially if you're trying to get somebody to fund whatever it is that you'd like them to fund. And so I just wanted to add that piece as well.
Can I also add to that piece?
Please keep adding.
Because one of the biggest struggles that we do find is that, you know, what is the reporting that is needed, you know, when accepting funds. Because at times, you know, we may get like maybe a small amount of funding, but they want the most data like that you can even imagine. That would take hours and hours of time. But then you may receive much larger amount of funding, then all they need is a conversation, which may take 30 minutes to talk about our experiences. And you know, one thing that pulls away from our organization is really allocating so much time on the data, especially when it's a smaller group of us. And instead, we're not actually out there serving the community, and it really takes a lot of juggling back and forth, and so many wearing of different hats to be able to really get our job done and really think back to why we're doing this work. And we're also having to then do so much on the back end as well.
Great, thank you. Oh yes, Billy?
My name's Billy Pete, Tallahassee Cultivate, and I'm gonna tap into what you just said. So are you starting to say no to those? Are you starting to recalibrate? How are you gonna move with that? Because I think your organization, African American Community Services, serves as a really good model
So to your first question, we have had to say no to grants that requires a lot of reporting. And that's through trial and error. That's from us saying, oh, we can do it, but then we're starting to say, okay, well, we can't. And that's really just because of the amount of people that we have within our organization doing the work. And if we find that it's really taken too much out of the organization, and it's really not being as conducive to us to really do it because of the amount of pieces that we have that can actually do the work, then we have to have hard conversations like that with each other, say, hey, let's not focus on this area right now just because we can't do the work and do the reporting all at the same time with the amount of people that we have within the organization. And that's really then making us have to pivot and say, okay, well, how do we continue to do our work within grants that kind of help us be able to leverage maybe reporting in a different way, which gives us more time to make true impact within the community. I'm trying to remember your second question. Oh yeah, so, you know, and you know a lot about what we do. It really depends on our values. And I believe that organizations, if you really embed DEI work into your values and your mission, you shouldn't have to pivot. And if there are other organizations and people that don't believe in that work, then it really isn't the right fit, because that means they're not really in it for the right reasons. So I think that that's a really important piece as well.
Yeah, I would add that somebody who's turned 62 recently is having a hard time with anybody telling me what words to use. You know, it's something that has come with age. But, you know, you have to be politically astute too. You know, you have to do that. You know, and I have a role with Stanford Healthcare, which I care about. But, you know, in the work that I do with Latinas, I do feel like I have a little bit more room there, but you're 100% right. This work requires you to rock the boat and to say the things that sometimes people, you know, and I do it all the time, to say the things that sometimes are not comfortable for people to say, but I try to do it in a way where I preserve relationships. So I think that's important. And sort of to your first question, I was the person when we just held our Latinas held our a conference in August at LinkedIn, so we're really happy about that. But we're all volunteer people. And so we're finding out that some of this work isn't easy, and sometimes we don't know when to say no, but we're learning. So, you know, I would say you could certainly speak up. I was actually surprised with the number of data points and requirements in some of that work. But I think it's important that we respectfully continue to say the words that hopefully moves us forward as a society.
Yeah, and I'll encourage you all, I think, from our side, we try to be equitable on all fronts, including our practices. And so some of the work that we do is, we know that we ask our partners when we're discussing funding a project, what they're currently collecting. So we leverage off of what already exists, rather than asking our partners to create something new specifically for us. And we have those conversations around like, hey, do you want to add your data analyst, if you have a data analyst in here, or what does that look like? What does that impact? So, and also being mindful that a lot of our non-clinical partners, we have a lot of clinical partners as well, but a lot of our non-clinical partners can't collect health indicators, so we're like, hey, it's okay, what are you currently measuring, and we will build off of that. So just kind of want to also share that it's really important to have those conversations, and I really appreciate it when partners just kind of are very transparent and just say, hey, this is where we are, and we're always happy to work within that constraints of our partners.
Great, thank you so much. So I have another question here. How do you reinstate or stay relevant to your partners who may be retracting their own DEI initiatives?
Well, and just for me at least, I don't believe in giving up. You have to be highly resilient and relentless in this work. And if you're doing something that isn't working, then you need to not keep doing that. I think we all have heard that in our careers. But I think too, you have to stay relevant yourself. And you also, I think, need to have a better understanding of what these companies are under as well. And so I think that I think it's reciprocal. Sort of what can I do to provide companies with information that will hopefully incentivize them to assist even in our efforts. And again, it's the data that I was talking about earlier. But it's also us being cognizant that there are pressures that companies are under, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to stop pursuing equality and equity, particularly for women of color.
So I have a deep love for nonprofits. My first job, I was 15 years old when I got into the nonprofit sector. Fell in love with it the first day. I've never turned back, been in the sector since. And while DEI has become a buzzword in recent years, I do believe that I'll venture to say that I feel like it's actually part of its core and woven into nonprofit organizations, our identities and who we are. And so I think it's always been there. And so nonprofits strive to lift and elevate communities who are experiencing disparities, who are impacted by systemic barriers and policies that perpetuate racism and discrimination. So while there is there's still a lot to unpack and figure out what it looks like again in philanthropy with this ruling. We continue to push forward. I am reminded time and time again that we have to stay true to our mission and to the core of who we are, our values, as we were saying. And sometimes it's a matter of having to sometimes just re-strategize on how we get there, but it's always important to know we are guided by the mission. So that's what I will say.
And I echo all of that. I would also add, and I'll give you all an example. We have this food program that we utilize through Second Harvest Food Bank. We receive deliveries and we provide different food resources to communities in need. And what happened for a while is that people would come to our building and we would package the food for them. And we started to see how maybe our numbers were a little bit low. We're starting to wonder maybe do people not really need it anymore? And then we decided, what, how about we just put the food outside and then actually see if people still need it or not. And we saw so many people, so many new clients come to our table to start getting food, which can update, how we're telling our story, and update how our data is speaking to communities as well. So that's, for us, is really trying to maintain being resilient and also trying to pivot in a sense where it's not really straying away from what we do, but trying something different that can then start to show funders we're still out here doing the work, and there is still that need as well.
Thank you. And it seems like there's a lot of personal value and a lot of being true to yourself and your mission in these conversations. From that, how do you protect yourselves? From it's a difficult conversation, it's difficult work. How do you protect yourselves? How do you stay resilient?
I'm not necessarily doing this for me. I hope that the work that we're doing can help not only the current generation, especially emerging professionals, but the next generation. I've come to accept, I think most of us, that I won't be alive by the time 1% changes to a more equitable number. By the time the wage gap closes for Latina women, which is the largest wage gap in comparison to males. And so this work can't be about what I want. It's got to be about what we do for others. It doesn't work, in my opinion, any other way. And I feel fortunate that I could be here and I could be speaking on these issues. But what I think about is that Latina like me who grew up in East San Jose. That Latina who was told when I started my job at this large academic medical center, Anna, whatever you do, keep your head down. Don't cause any trouble. You're lucky to have that job. And what I did, the concessions that I made to feel like I would be accepted. Those are not things that I would want emerging professionals, young Latinas to experience. So it has to be bigger than yourself.
Yeah, and I would add, it definitely has to be bigger than yourself, and also being able to draw from personal experiences to why you're in this work as well. Like I know for me, growing up in New York City, I've been denied a bank account just because of the color of my skin. I've been stopped by police just because of the color of my skin. I've had the privilege to go, which wasn't in my bio, but to a really good private school, a private college called Skidmore College, where it was actually filled with mostly people who come from very wealthy backgrounds. And for me, I was more so part of like a group of like 50 students who were brought and given a scholarship from the inner city to attend the school. And even though, you know, maybe we talk different than those who had a better like high school and upbringing, whether it is, you know, we wore our clothes differently, the data showed that our grades were actually better. So, you know, I'm able to see kind of like what a product of different programs that creates, you know, equity and access for all can really, you know, start to shake things up a bit and show why, you know, different things like that is needed. And so for me, I can just really take a look at myself, at my close friends and say, hey, I've seen it work. And even though we do something that may be a little bit differently, there's so many different programs out here within this world, within our community, that can work as well and create access and equity for everyone.
I want to echo what was just said by both Anna and Lavere. I lean a lot on my personal and lived experience. Similarly, I think it's about paying it forward. I'm a product of Head Start. I grew up in East San Jose, first generation Mexican, first in my family to go to college. You know, recall my mom accessing services from Sacred Heart in a time where we needed just that support to hold on for a bit. My mom getting prenatal care for my siblings from Gardner Health. So all of the lived experience I never knew was preparing me for what I would be doing, advocating for our partners, because we know the impact it has on people's lives. So that's what I would say. It's not about us, it's really just paying it forward and lifting up communities, and just the way that they uplifted so many of us growing up.
And we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm Lisa Rice. I work at San Jose State. 46% of our students are first generation, so everything you're saying really resonates with why I do my job. You were talking about protecting yourself. I wonder if I could flip it to protecting others. I had a very real experience this year of traveling to the East Coast for higher ed fundraising conferences, and was really horrified at the impact the political climate was having on fellow fundraisers and what they could and couldn't fundraise. And it really made me kind of think about my responsibility to other fundraisers. I wonder what you think in the same kind of concept, whether higher ed, you know, medical, whatever the sector may be.
Yes, and I've worked in higher ed, you know, for quite some time, and I would definitely say resilience is key. Sometimes, you know, the scariest thing could be if like you're the only one in a room that actually thinks a certain way. And I've had to be there multiple times, and you know, at times think, am I wrong here? Am I not thinking the right way? But you know, understanding that there's so many other people, understanding the support system, and you know, we may not always be in the same room together, but we're definitely scattered throughout, and just making sure that we know who we can rely on to then when we do need to come together to advocate what's right for our communities.
Yeah. You know, sometimes it can be a lonely place to be, but I think what holds true for yourself, what's important to you, you have to be sometimes okay with that just being you. And so, I know that I won't stop until I'm not here. And I hope that I have many people along with me to do that. But sometimes other things come up for other people in their lives, they move on, but that's okay. But if you know what you're doing is right, then in my mind, you just keep doing that.
I think we hear a lot of what you're hearing. We heard in the East Coast. I think we're starting to hear from our nonprofits this year, this narrative of what could happen in November, taking us back to a few years ago. So I think it's leaning in on those organizations who continue to be that support and that safety for communities who continue to be under attack. And for us, it's really leaning in and figuring out, and philanthropy is also already having these conversations. How do we show up and how do we come together to support these organizations who are, again, are protecting and keeping our communities safe, especially those who are under attack.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions in the audience? Well, we'll
I have a
continue.
question.
Oh, yes,
I have
Natalie.
a question. I'm not even sure this is part of what you have there, Ryan, but what keeps you motivated? I hear you all saying, you know, it's not about us. It's about the bigger picture. I love that. What keeps you motivated? Because and I'm going to make sure I'm saying your name correctly. You had mentioned, I know 40 years from now or in the near future, I won't see that the corporate America, Latino will be corporate senior executive position. I won't see that growth from 1% to 2 or 3 or 4. I won't see that. So what keeps you motivated to do this work?
I think a lot of it has to do with, I never felt that I could be myself for many years. I felt that I spent many years trying to be somebody I wasn't, and that got exhausting. And even when I started leading Latinas, I didn't really talk about it in the workplace. I didn't want to be that woman with my brown flag all over the organization. And then I just got tired. I get tired of trying to be something I wasn't, trying to say the things that I think people want to hear, trying to, you know, life is short. You know, when you're in healthcare, you have a true appreciation for how unpredictable life can be and how fragile we all are. And so I think a combination of those things, and not seeing people like me in positions that I want to aspire to was also exhausting. And I created this group because I didn't have one like it. And when I finally started to climb the ladder, I was the first Latina executive director where I work, I thought, wow, what a difference this would have been if I would have had people who talked to me about, you know, how to negotiate, how to have presentations, and all the things that I didn't get, you know. And so I think there's just a number of experiences that I had, and you know, even my own father being subjected to racism when he was in the army in the 50s, and all of these things just came together for me, and it just gets me up every day. It just keeps me going every day. And if I can change one life and help maybe fill the gaps that were gaps for me, that's what keeps me going.
Yes, I would say, you know, in a perfect world, I can impact as many people within the hundreds of thousands to the millions if I actually had that opportunity. And I really believe that I would want to do that just because I know that there's been people who've invested in me over time, people who've, you know, looked after me in times of like where I felt that the world wasn't really just to me. And if we don't have people like that in the world that's really just trying to look after someone else in need, then, you know, why did we all come together in the first place? I think that, you know, in certain situations, it's good to be, okay, a little bit selfish for yourself, but if we're all just selfish and only thought about ourselves, then what are we doing as a people anyway? So I think it's always important just to look after maybe those who made that mistake. or those who never really had opportunities, to make sure that we're not just paying it forward, but we're creating and setting that structure and that way of life where it is okay to look after those who are in need.
I think I'll just echo. I think it's our responsibility, especially, I feel very lucky and privileged to do what I do every day. And looking at reminding myself of all the hurdles and barriers I think you'd wish folks still didn't experience now, but continue to, and it's our responsibility to ensure that we provide that support. Echoing what was just said.
Thank you. Any other questions? Oh, Elizabeth?
So, Elizabeth Wells again. So I have the honor and privilege of being the director of an organization, Foundation for a College Education. And we work with high school and college students to make sure that they not only get into college, but they graduate from a four-year college. And all of our student population are first generation, students from lower income households, students of color from East Palo Alto and surrounding communities. And so I'm in a unique position where I can help influence a lot of the emerging leaders, right, this next generation, to decide which areas they want to go into, what careers they want to take. Being here in Silicon Valley, there's a large emphasis on going into STEM-related careers, which is fabulous. But just wanting to have some ideas, ways that we can work together, collaborate to create more of a pipeline into nonprofit careers, into putting these young people into positions where they're able to make decisions. Young folks with the lived experience who share these same experiences, to be able to get some exposure to what a career in this area would look like. There's plenty of opportunities for them to see, STEM type careers, coding and whatnot. But how do we create more of this pipeline, create opportunities for young people to have a glimpse into this world, before they make that leap of faith?
Yes, and thank you for mentioning that. At ASCSA, we do have our Leadership Academy, which is comprised of high school and college age students. And it's mostly made up of Black and Latino students, students who may be in schools or communities, but don't really see anyone who really looks like them. So what we're able to do a lot is bring them into our center and then create experiences where we have various panelists from all sorts of walks of life. So whether that's in engineering or doctors or even mayors or anyone who's on city council, or even people within the private sector, speak with them to really at least make sure they have options, and really hear from experiences on what got them into that work. In addition to that, we make sure that they're already aspiring leaders within the community, regardless of which field that they're in, so that they're able to speak up more when they're in school and talk to our community more, volunteer more. So we're really being able to, one, have them create or make the decisions for themselves, but we're exposing them to maybe things that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to be exposed to if they didn't come across our agency. So I would, to what you're saying, I would just say, more exposure, more partnerships with different organizations. I want ours, and I know there's a lot of different organizations that have different forms of leadership academies that I know we're trying to also get involved with, to really bring the students together and really create that exposure and make sure that they know that they have options before they make a decision.
One of the strategies that we've taken with Lean and Latinas is we would hold a Get Inspired conference. Our view is if folks can't see it, then they don't feel they can be it. So we would hold this conference and bring in Latino leaders that either, really the focus of the conference was to inspire a Latina to either go to college or return to college. But we would also, pull in people where they could see, oh, this person is a director, this Latina is a director, or in some type of role. And sort of the feedback that we would get on that conference is, I did feel inspired. I do feel that I can be in certain roles that maybe I didn't think I could be in. So I agree with everything you're saying. I think it's kind of hard to say this because we do lack representation. across corporate America in C-suite positions. So it's what, on one hand, you want to encourage young folks, but on the other hand, we have this other big problem that we need to solve. And you know, we know that we see people of color in sort of the first part of the workplace pipeline, entry level, but where we start to see our numbers dwindle is at the manager level, at the director level, at the C-suite level. So, you know, how do we continue to inspire young folks? But we're also contending with that. So I think it's going to take a number of strategies to really, all of the efforts that we're putting in, really what are the outcomes that we want to see?
I'll say that I was part of, so the county at the time had what they called the speeding program, and it was where they connect high school kids during the summer to different organizations, and that's how I got my first experience in the nonprofit. And I think having that first-hand experience going in and understanding and seeing it firsthand, being able to contribute was life-changing for me. Like I said, it was my first day, and I was supporting the receptionist. That was my job, and helping her with the task. And I remember feeling so excited to be learning a new task. I didn't know what a nonprofit was at the time. I didn't know their function. I didn't, again, first generation, not knowing and understanding what I wanted to do with my life, but having that work experience during the summer at a young age was just life-changing. So I think having more of those programs are really impactful.
Great. 1 second, Ellie. Andrea had her hand up first. Do you want to ask your question? Then we'll get to Ellie, sorry.
Hi, Andrea. I was just wondering, what does successful collaboration and implementation look like to you, either externally with other nonprofits or internally with your current program staff?
There's a lot of great nonprofits out here in Silicon Valley. So I think to start before the collaboration is always the relationship piece. I know for me, whether it's meeting another director or even just if I'm going to another center and I see their staff and really kind of feeling welcomed, those initial kind of meetings for me, I think makes it a lot more easier to really start learning more about different organizations and seeing, okay, here's the common trend that's really impacting all of us. And once we see that, these things that are happening within our communities, whether it's, DEI issues or policy issues, and we're able to then come together and say, hey, all the communities that we serve have, this common goal or is impacted in this way, it makes it so much easier for us to really collaborate. Whether that's meet the candidate forums that we put on, we usually collaborate with a lot of different organizations, or whether it's other organizations really trying to, be involved with our MLK luncheons or our Juneteenth festivals. And our leadership academy. Once we're able to identify, hey, these whatever's happening within our community is impacting all of us, it makes it so much easier. And then for me, especially, once you're able to just meet the person, meet the leader behind these organizations and see all the great work and hear their story and hear their impact, it makes it a lot easier to really want to work with them as well.
There are a number of organizations out there that are doing similar work to what we're doing with Lean and Latinas here locally, whether it's the Latinas Silicon Valley Coalition, or some of the large national groups as well, Alpha. I read a post over the weekend that really got my attention from a colleague who is doing a lot of work around partnerships. And he wrote in that post, we can't have a claw mentality. And that really hit home for me. And I thought, okay, because sometimes you might be going after the same funders, you might have something similar, and I thought, if one of us wins, we all do. Because even though there's these different sort of organizations that I mentioned, we come at things a little bit differently, but at the end of the day, we have the same goal, which is the success of our community. And so what I've shared, talking to myself, I said, okay, every day, who am I supporting? Who am I amplifying? I can do that easily for my organization. But who else am I supporting and amplifying and promoting? And so I caught myself the last 2 days promoting another organization. And, you know, I think that we're stronger together. And so that sort of that claw mentality piece really hit home for me. And so I think for me, that's where I'm at. It's like, yeah, I'd love to raise money for my own organization, of course. But again, if I'm gonna sit here and say this is bigger than me, then I really need to walk the talk.
I think, you know, looking at the way that we strive to partner with our partners, it's really around that mutual trust, having those candid conversations, understanding what their projects are, how we can best support. Sometimes it's those conversations lead to then us being able to reach out to other funders to see if they're interested in also investing and amplifying their work. We strive to be thought partners in that process. So like when we're framing and shaping proposals with them, it's really for us to ensure that we are their strongest advocates when we're presenting to our board and to our committee. So it's to really just understand and learn from our partners. So there's that mutual learning. When it comes to implementation, we'll do check-ins just to see if there's anything that we can do. But again, our intention is really just we're learners and just again, and partners at the same time. So that's what I would say, that when there's opportunity for us to connect them to other foundations or other funders, we're happy to do that.
We'll get to you, Kat. Illy, you had a question?
Yes, one more question for me. And really hit home to me about the 1% 4 years later. And my question to you is, can you give me examples, or you know examples, any of you, where people or organizations are providing support for people that look like us from historically excluded populations, those that are justice involved, those that are disability? Are there programs within your systems that help those people stay? Because in life sciences and in climate, they get people in, but 6 months later, they're out the door.
Yeah, I love that question. It's because what I do every day of my life, literally. So usually what I tell companies is your story is in your data. As long as you're collecting voluntary employee demographic data, your story is there. You don't have to look outside of your own home. Our company is looking at who's getting hired, who's getting promoted, and who is leaving. That's what we're doing. Building programs around, and some of these things have been around for decades. Mentorship programs, what are you doing around state interviews? And also, because I do this work, engaging with leaders and to appreciate that you're working with a very even diverse leaders from different generations who look at things in a different way. But I think companies who are, one, continuing to invest in their DEI offices, that says something about that company. Companies who are sharing with the public their demographics, that says a lot about that company. I was looking at Salesforce, that's right. They're out with their data. Companies that publish, like for example, Stanford Medicine published the Commission on, I'm forgetting the words right now, Commission on Justice and Equity and Recommendation. That's a publicly available report. And it's not those types of reports that say, look at all the shiny things we're doing, look at all the amazing things. No, it is, here's where we need to get better. So really, those are the companies. When I heard you say people are leaving, it's because that's not a belonging environment. You don't stay anywhere where you don't feel like you belong, unless you're somebody like me who was told 30-something years ago, you're lucky to have the job. So, you know, I'm from a different generation, but, when that just said, oh, this is just the way it is. I think companies were publicly talking about this topic and that it's important. Those are the companies that are I think that are going to make a difference.
I would say one thing we get caught up in a lot is that like we do so much within our community. And whenever we have, a lot of times, the most trouble we have is like maybe a Friday evening, like at 5 p.m. Someone coming to us with a service that we may not actually be able to provide. So whether that is a mother who has a child with her who has no place to stay, whether it's getting a call regarding like someone who's in the justice system, who needs someone to advocate for them. So many different things that maybe we're not ready because that's just not involved in our day-to-day, but because of who we are, we make sure that no one who walks through our doors is leaving empty-handed. So whether that is, trying to pivot for that mother and make sure that she is able to stay in a hotel over the weekend until we put her in a shelter the next week, or it's making sure that, hey, we're having like a big meeting regarding, hey, what can we do to help someone by giving them a letter that can help with maybe volunteer hours or whatnot, or even trying to get in contact with the city or another organization we know that may be able to leverage different services as well. So those are the things that we try to talk about a lot is, what can we streamline, like what can we do, what can we make sure that no one leaves empty-handed, but then also creating that list of those partnerships or those community contacts that we have that can be able to help someone that may not necessarily be in that scope of what we offer, but trying to make sure that no one's just walking out of our doors with nowhere left to go.
Can I get a question?
Cat on here. I wanted to actually bring us back to that partnership conversation from earlier, but instead of at an organizational level, to think about an interpersonal level. So I guess just curious if any of you have had the experience of interacting with people maybe who are impacted by this shift in culture and maybe are afraid to be on your side when you're advocating or making a case for your DEI initiative. How do you identify the right allies, and how do you recruit folks to be on your side, and at what point do you say, okay, this is not working, and just add some color to how you navigate that when you're trying to make a case for your work?
I'll just underscore the data again. It's amazing to me how when I do share sort of the wage gap, a lot of people say, oh, I didn't know that. Or when I say 1%, well, I didn't know that. So I really try to leverage evidence-based data and let that speak first. And, would I like everybody to be on board with me? Well, it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. But I think allies are very important in this work. I was on it wasn't an interview, it was sort of like this, but it was by the then CEO of Survey, and it was an in-house all hands that they would have every month. And I was invited to speak on Latina Equal Pay Day, which by the way is coming up on October 3rd. And so, white male, CEO, and he said, Anna, we have a lot of our Latinx employee resource group members here. What would you say to them as they're looking at progressing in their careers? And I had to sit there with that question, because I thought, okay, I'm either gonna just say what I'm thinking, which is probably the better thing to do, because that's why I'm here. And I said, well, we can certainly pursue education. We can certainly work on our skill sets, but at the end of the day, it's going to be people who look like you that are behind the C-suite doors and the boardroom doors to open those doors. Otherwise, it's not going to matter what we do. So you have to, he was a little surprised by my response, but it's the truth, because it isn't people of color who are primarily occupying those seats. And so sometimes you have to take risks, and I also recognize this work is going to take allies.
I think one of the strategies that has worked for us has been this embarking on a learning journey together when you're trying to bring in those partners. And we bring in the data, we go into community, we learn from our partners, we learn from peers, and it's everyone kind of learning together. And at that point then, it resonates, whether that resonates with your core values of whether you want a partner or not. I think it really depends on the person. But that's, again, something that has really worked for us is, again, we're all learning together and trying to understand and figure out how we can collectively make some impact, but those allies who decide to come on board will stay because it resonates with them, and perhaps maybe if it doesn't resonate, maybe they decide to tap out.
And I'll say, a lot of times, especially if you know the person, you will be subject to a lot of hard conversations that you have to have with people to really be able to make them know like where you're coming from, and then for you to also know where they're coming from. And I've noticed that if you have that good of relationship with someone, you're able to find that common ground, and you're able to then understand, okay, I see where you're coming from. Here's how you can approach the situation. Here's how we can approach it together if necessary. But it's only going to happen if you do feel comfortable leaning into that discomfort and really being able to show what your values are and not having to take a step back just because someone may say an opinion that's different from yours.
Thank you. As an idealist, it feels wrong to have slides on equity and inclusion, so I am happy and grateful that the three of you are allies. Any other questions?
I had a follow-up question. If
Oh,
anybody else has a
wonderful.
question. Do we have time?
Yes.
When you talk about the role of allies then, if you could maybe go one step further and just maybe share with folks, like, if one of us were to be in a position of being an ally, right? Because we're all not homogenous. We can all serve as allies for others. Like, are there particular things that allies can do to be a good ally, I guess, in particular?
I'll share. So if you work for an employer that does have affinity groups, employee resource groups, I often tell people to join as many of those as possible. They're really a good way to immerse ourselves in the culture of other people. So you have to really look at, am I doing that? Am I in spaces that I'm not normally in? And even though I do DEI work, I'm still learning. I will go to the Pride ERG or LGBTQ, and I'm learning more about pronouns than I've ever known. So I think that if you're not finding ways to learn about the lived experiences of other cultures and people, I think it's really hard to say that anybody would be an ally. And so I have to learn. And so I would suggest that. And learning comes in different ways, right? Books and groups and communities. But I think that's probably the number one thing to do is how am I educating myself to be an ally? What does that mean? And how am I learning?
Also having that desire to want to be aware and open, because I think that's where it starts first, many times. And if I see myself as an ally, I am helping amplify the realities and stories of the experiences that I've learned about. And you do it in obviously in a very respectful way, but also with the understanding that you're there to support and help, again, advocate and support a group or an organization. So I think that awareness and that willingness to want to learn, to have that mentality, and then as we can amplify the message in a way that is obviously respectful.
So one thing I'll talk about is an initiative that we've been working on within our community, which is reparations, right, for our Black community here within Santa Clara County, right? So when thinking about being an ally, as I look around the room, like maybe a lot of people here wouldn't really benefit from reparations. However, when you think of the reparations movement, a lot of the focus is really on like allies and how allies can also help show up for the movement as well. So when I hear of anyone asking how can they be an ally, it's really just being able to put yourself in a position where maybe personally you wouldn't benefit from it, but other individuals may be able to benefit from your help with the education piece and advocacy piece in matters like that.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions from the audience? Yes, Jessica?
I was thinking about what Lily said about people might come in the door and then leave within 6 months, and I'm thinking, if I, obviously we work in fundraising, so I'm on HR, if I approach, say, HR member, can I say, hey, I noticed, after like 6 months, all of our teachers that are LGBT seem to be leaving or whatever, and they say, okay, and they agree, and then they say, what should we do about it? What do I say then?
I would say, who's talking to those people before they're leaving? I think that's critical. So when I was an operational manager, it's something that I would do. I didn't care what role the person was in. You know, frontline person, manager person, why are you leaving? So you may not always get really the whys, but I think, and why wait till people are leaving? It's probably the other thing is, you know, companies use surveys, but I think human relationships is really what makes the difference. It's not a perfect science by any means. There's a lot of variables, but if a company doesn't know why, that's the first problem. You're not doing enough to know why.
Kind of underscoring what you mentioned, like belonging, right? That sense of belonging in an organization, and going back to sometimes you don't want to wait until they leave, but a lot of times there's the exit interviews and trying to assess how are they looking at that data, are they having those conversations and asking, and again, the surveys, you know, the employee surveys that go out sometimes twice a year, but then it doesn't have to be that structured. Sometimes, like, we've had walking groups at our organization, or sometimes it's just getting together for lunch, and it's building those relationships to feel connected to the mission, but to the people that you're working with.
Right. I mean, is it a psychologically safe environment? Can I say to my manager, actually, I don't always feel comfortable. I feel, you know, I don't. Is it safe to talk about whatever? You know, however I identify. If it's not, then, you know, people are there because it's paying the rent at the end of the day.
And then one thing I've noticed just over many years is that it's not always going to be the perfect fit for everyone, but having honest, transparent dialogue is super important. And then also, you know, when the exit interviews happen, how is the organization then learning from those exit interviews? Are they seeing trends? As we're always having an ever-changing work environment. Things, the way it's now isn't the way it was, you know, 10, 15 years ago, right? So how are we continue to implement practices and strategies that's conducive for everyone who walks through that door, and being able to have an organizational culture that everyone, you know, whether they leave for a new job or exit, can kind of say, hey, this felt like this environment. I recommend it to a friend. Here's what I've learned. And being able to, you know, feel like I talk about values a lot. How is it then going back to the organization's values and how they're then promoting it amongst the teams?
Yeah, I can't stress enough around diversity of leadership. I really, you know, if your leadership does not mirror the workforce, I think you have to really look at that as part of the strategy around retention. You have to really challenge that.
Any other questions out there? All right, any final thoughts that you?
Yeah, this is a calm group. I was like, let's get it going. Just to say thank you, and just love having this conversation. It's an important conversation.
Same, thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. This was amazing.
I actually have one more question for you all. What's the one advice you would give someone, a colleague, who's feeling daunted or burned out from this? Like, they come to you asking, oh, this has been such a rough conversation to have, what's the one advice you would give them?
I would say it's the advice I was given many, many years ago by a professor that I take with me everywhere I go, and that's just lean into discomfort. There's always gonna be, situations where you're uncomfortable, where you kind of feel like the load is coming on you and you don't really know how to move forward. But, if you give up, there are people who are gonna be impacted by that. And as long as you know what you're doing is right, then there's gonna be maybe other people who feel the same way. And being able to lean into your networks, your relationships, will always help benefit you in the end, because you know what you're doing is right, and you're able to at least not give up in that pursuit of really helping other people.
Yeah, because even within my group, we've had people come and go. We've had, people who want to join Lean in Latinas as a member, and it's kind of like Weight Watchers. They're like, they show up at the first meeting and they've done everything, and then 3 meetings later, they're not there. So that's part of this. It's part of this. So I think you have to want to do it without question. You have to want to do it when you're one eye is open, like me, doing email, or on the weekends, or not watching the show that I want to watch. And so I think if somebody isn't committed in that way, not that they're not committed in other things in their lives, right? It doesn't work. And so, even people who work with me, I don't expect everybody that I encounter to have this passion that I do. And so I think it's something they have to check in with themselves, and I support them either way. But this type of work, it's in you, and you can't even explain it sometimes. And if that's not there, then it can be challenging.
I think I have 2 reflections. I think one is to also give yourself that time to rest, because there are many times where I love this work, and I look at my computer and I'm like, oh, I can't process right now. I just have to stop and give myself that ability to just close the computer, take care of myself for a bit, recharge, and then I come back and I feel energized. And then I know sometimes it feels like progress is taking forever. And I know sometimes, even if a strategy isn't a slam dunk at the beginning, like every small step forward needs to be celebrated. We need to celebrate, because I also think of this conversation we're having around DEI, around elevating lived experience, about elevating and talking and feeling comfortable talking about that. It wasn't celebrated. We really weren't as open about it, 15, 20 years ago, right? And I see how far we've come and how far the sector of philanthropy, how diverse it is, and that gives me hope. So I'd say rest, and also again celebrate even the smallest wins, because they all contribute and chip away to our larger vision.
Shopping therapy helps me. So you see it.
Thank you for bringing back around.
That's my outlet. But yeah.
Well, let's give a round of applause to our lovely panelists. Thank you all for coming.